Hello YouTube. Now it dawned on me last week that during lockdown you're probably watching many more films than you were prior to lockdown. You're probably watching a lot more TV as well. And your media consumption is entirely up to you, but it could be that you're watching series on Netflix, you could be watching series on the BBC or on ITV or Channel 4 or other foreign outlets and platforms. And it's worth taking the time really to think about where those TV shows and where those films come from. Now, I wanted to produce a video for you really about cultural imperialism and media imperialism. Now, cultural imperialism is a much bigger, broader subject than the media, but the media fits into this in some ways. So the idea of cultural imperialism relates back to times of empires where a sort of more wealthy, more developed nation would have power over a less wealthy nation. So the ideas of and the legacies of these empires lives on to this day. You can still see British influence in the West Indies. You can still see British cultural influence in India because those places were part of our empire. There are strong French influence in some African nations like Algeria, Ivory Coast, and other places such as Haiti, etc. You'll see European influence around the world, and it's all to do with colonies, colonialisation, and empire. And really, media imperialism is a similar idea. We are beyond really the times of empires. Most nations have won independence from the empires of old. So really, the way that we are influenced or influencing other nations comes to this idea of media imperialism. Now, one sort of definition of media imperialism is the over-concentration of mass media from larger nations as a significant variable in negatively affecting smaller nations, in which the national identity of smaller nations is lessened or lost due to media homogeneity inherent in mass media from larger countries. So broken down, that basically means that smaller, less wealthy nations are inundated with mass media. And what I mean by that is news, film, television, documentary, music, radio from larger, more developed nations. So there are anomalies. I mean, there's a huge film industry in India. The Bollywood industry is massive. France has a very kind of strong, independent French film industry, and other countries in Europe do. But you've got to understand that a lot of what we see in this country comes from the US, and what a lot of other European countries receive as mass media comes from the US. And if you were to live in a less economically developed country, a lot of your film, a lot of your cinema, a lot of your TV would come from larger nations such as us, or the US, or France, or other places. So it's this idea that mass media can sort of work as an empire of culture and of signs. So taking this to the extreme, it could be that your mass media consumption actually impacts what you buy and how you think and how you speak. So an example of this might be that you've watched a certain American TV series. They might use a particular catchphrase, and then it catches on and you use it in your own vernacular with your friends. There are loads of examples of this, and you can think of some for yourselves. It might be that you've watched a film that's come from the US, or it's come from another major developed nation, and you pick up certain fashion tropes, and the clothes that you wear might have been influenced by a particular TV series or a particular film franchise. I think we're all guilty of this to a certain degree. But if you were to think of other less developed nations, they're receiving a huge amount of media from Western European nations or from the US, and it's impacting how They learn English. Now, I once lived with a Ukrainian lad who spoke English with an American accent because he learned English through watching American TV series. So his English came through with a really strong American accent, which is a kind of example of cultural imperialism or media imperialism. But really, your worldview and the way you see things and perhaps your values have come through the media, and the chances are the media that you've watched have either been British, European or American. And you might not have had much opportunity to watch anything from the Middle East or from the Far East, or perhaps even African nations. So really, a few examples of this might be from my own DVD collection, my own film collection. Films such as something called Pusher, which is a Danish film franchise. Very, very good. You might not have heard of it, but that's been made by a Danish company with some collaboration. A film such as A Prophet, a French film that was absolutely superb. The Secret in Their Eyes, an absolutely brilliant Argentinian film. And Argentina have got a really strong film industry at the moment, and they've put out some superb films in the last 5, 6, 7 years that have reached our shores and have made a big impact. Something like Ken Loach's Sorry We Missed You from last year. British film company, British director, but has been funded by a French company, partly. Another British director, Ben Wheatley. This is funded partly by a British company and partly by a French company. Now, it is worth considering when you sit down to watch a film where it's been made, where the money's come from, because certain nations create certain styles and genres of media. Now then, I'm going to use France as a bit of a case study because I'm taking this from a 2016 report from the French government, from the French embassy, and France was really they're really at the forefront of cinema because they were one of the first nations to treat cinema as a very serious art form, and they still do as a nation. Statistically speaking, in 2015. 2/3 of French people went to the cinema at least once a week. 87% of under 25s in France went to the cinema at least once during the week. Now, cinema in France, going to the cinema is French people's main leisure activity. Now, that's certainly the case in 2016. It may have changed since then, but I can't see it have changed much in that time. Media consumption has changed globally because we aren't going to the cinema as much as we were maybe even 5 years ago. But just try and consider this. If you were to go to the cinema when you can, when we're allowed out, have a think about where those films have been made and where the money's come from. Chances are that most of those films that you can see up on the board on the list are Hollywood American films. There might be the odd British film, and there might be the odd Bollywood film. Depends when you go. However, there aren't going to be many films from other parts of the world, and that's not to say that many films aren't made in the rest of the world. They are. We just don't get them here because we are inundated by films from developed nations. So if you think about it, if you think about France as a case study, French films had a 37% market share of films that you could see in the cinema in France. That's a huge proportion. It's not a majority, but it's a huge proportion of films they could go and see. Now, you could just compare it with other nations. German films basically constituted 27.5% of films seen in German cinemas. Italy, it was 21%, Italian films. Spain was 19% of films you could go and see were Spanish. And in the UK, it's just a measly 11%. So when you think about it, that roughly means that about 1 in 10 films might have been funded by a UK company, or might be a British film that you could go and see in the cinema. Now, what France does, they make their own films in France in the French language, but they also have production companies that fund other productions around the world, and those production companies use their money to help fund smaller projects around the globe. So co-productions with French film companies account for 45% of films screened in France. That's almost half of all films screened in France have had money from a French production company. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, so what? Well, what it means is France have kind of protected some of their national identity, and it's kind of more of a nationalistic idea whereby what we want to see is going to be French, and we're going to try and preserve that. And what we've got in this country is perhaps an inundation of American films. And I'm not knocking American films. Some of my favourite films are American. But it means that we've sort of got on a saturation almost of media from the US. So it's just worth thinking about when you sit down to watch something. Is it British? Is it American? Where's the money come from? And how does that influence what I'm about to see? So actually pick up a DVD case or watch the credits of a TV show or a film and see which film production company has made it, or television production company has made it, and where are they based, because it's quite interesting to see where the money's come from and who they help and what style of film or television production they have made. Have a look, see what's out there, and I'll hear from you soon.